You won't believe what happened when Karen snuck into my root cellar. It all started on a quiet afternoon when I was just going about my usual day. I had no idea that things were about to get completely out of hand. The moment I realized she was inside, my heart skipped a beat. I couldn't believe someone would actually sneak into my private space without asking or warning. It felt like an invasion, and not just of my property, but of my trust. You see, the root cellar isn't just some forgotten hole in the ground. It's a place I've cared for over the years. A spot where I store fresh vegetables, preserves, and other things I rely on through the seasons. It's a hidden gem on my property, tucked away and out of sight. I like to keep it that way. It's mine, private and quiet. And suddenly, there was someone else down there without my permission. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Maybe the creaking noises were just the house settling, or some animal wandering nearby. But then I heard footsteps. Soft, but definitely not familiar. My heart started pounding. I grabbed my phone and went outside to check. That's when I noticed the door to the root cellar was slightly open. That door is usually tightly shut, and I make it a point to double-check before I leave the house. Something was off. I stepped closer, calling out, "Hello? Who's there?" No answer. Just silence. My mind raced with possibilities. Had someone broken in? Was it a neighbor? A stranger? Then I heard a voice, sharp and irritating, coming from inside. It was Karen. If you know what I mean when I say Karen, you probably get the picture already. The kind of person who always seems to want to control things, complains a lot, and doesn't respect boundaries. I had dealt with Karen before, in small doses. She'd come around, asking nosy questions, pushing into spaces that weren't hers, making demands. But I never thought she'd cross the line and sneak into my root cellar. There's something about knowing someone is somewhere they shouldn't be that's completely unsettling. It's like your safe space is suddenly violated. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. Why would she do this? What was she looking for? Did she even think about how invasive this was? I tried reasoning through it. Maybe she thought I was hiding something. Maybe she wanted to prove a point or stir up trouble. I didn't know her exact reasons, but I knew I had to act. This wasn't just about some silly prank or nosiness. This was trespassing, plain and simple. So I made a decision. I couldn't just let her roam around in my root cellar, messing with my things or causing damage. I needed to keep control of the situation until help arrived. I wasn't about to escalate things into a fight, but I also wasn't going to let her get away with this. As I reached the door, I told her firmly to stay put. "Karen, you need to wait here. I'm calling the sheriff." Her voice raised, full of indignation and disbelief. She accused me of being unreasonable, of overreacting. But I didn't back down. The moments that followed were tense. The air felt thick with frustration and disbelief. She was pacing back and forth inside the cellar, shouting that she could leave whenever she wanted. But the truth was, I had locked the door behind her. I made sure it clicked shut. It wasn't about punishment. It was about safety and making sure she didn't just disappear before the sheriff could come. While I waited, I kept checking the door. Every now and then, I called out, trying to stay calm. I wanted her to know I wasn't trying to hurt her, just protect my space. But inside, I was running through all the what-ifs. What if she got angry? What if she tried to break out? What if this escalated into something worse? The sun started to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the yard. The quiet of the neighborhood contrasted sharply with the chaos that was unfolding just a few feet away in that little hidden cellar. It was almost surreal how something so small and secret could turn into such a big problem. People often don't realize how important privacy and boundaries are until they're crossed. For me, that root cellar was more than just a storage space. It was a symbol of control, of peace, of the little slice of calm I had in this busy world. Seeing Karen in there uninvited was like watching that calm get shattered. And yet, even with all the anger and frustration, I tried to remind myself that I needed to keep a level head. This wasn't about revenge or humiliation. It was about doing what was right, protecting my home, my belongings, and ultimately, myself. The minutes felt like hours. My phone sat on the porch, ready to call the sheriff at a moment's notice. I debated whether to dial right away or wait a bit longer, hoping Karen would calm down and leave on her own. But deep down, I knew she wouldn't. Not without consequences. That's when I started thinking about what happens when people don't respect boundaries. When they think they can just walk into your life, your property, your space, without permission. It's not just about laws or rules. It's about respect, about trust. And Karen? She showed me she had none. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I was doing the right thing. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. Sometimes you have to set hard lines to protect what matters most. And sometimes that means locking a door until help arrives. I kept checking the door, my mind racing with all the possibilities. What was Karen thinking down there? Was she angry, scared, or was she just stubbornly waiting for me to give up and let her go? I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I couldn't let her out until the sheriff showed up. That was the only way to keep things from spiraling out of control. The root cellar was cold and dark, barely lit by the small window near the ceiling. I imagined Karen pacing around, probably yelling or banging on walls, frustrated and furious. But I also wondered if she was starting to realize just how serious the situation was. Did she understand that sneaking into someone's private space wasn't just a harmless prank? That it was a violation? I wasn't sure. As I stood outside, the weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders. This wasn't just about me or Karen anymore. It was about setting boundaries, about making sure no one felt they could cross the line without consequences. I thought about how often people take things for granted, thinking someone else's space or privacy is theirs for the taking. It's a dangerous mindset, and it needed to be addressed. I remember the last time Karen came by, demanding to see my property records, questioning my landscaping choices, and making a scene in front of the neighbors. She acted like she owned the place, like she had some right to control everything around here. That was the kind of person who didn't stop until they got what they wanted, no matter who they hurt in the process. And now she was locked in my root cellar. The sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the yard. The neighborhood was quiet, the usual sounds of children playing and dogs barking replaced by an eerie stillness. I glanced at my phone again, ready to call the sheriff at any moment. I wasn't sure how long this would take or how Karen would react when the law showed up, but I knew I had to stand firm. I thought about all the advice I'd heard over the years, how to deal with difficult neighbors, how to set boundaries without creating drama, how to stay calm in tense situations. None of it really prepared me for locking someone in a root cellar. This was new territory, and it felt strange. But I was determined to do what was necessary. I paced back and forth, trying to stay calm and focused. I tried calling Karen's name softly, telling her I wasn't trying to hurt her, just protect my property. But the only response was silence. I wondered if she was ignoring me or if she was too angry to speak. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Every sound seemed amplified. The creak of a branch, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of a car passing by. I kept imagining what was going through Karen's mind. Did she regret sneaking in? Did she think she'd get away with it? Was she plotting her next move? My thoughts drifted to what could happen if things escalated. What if Karen panicked? What if she tried to break the lock or call for help? Would the sheriff arrive in time? Would neighbors notice and get involved? The uncertainty was nerve-wracking. Then I heard a faint tapping at the door. Karen was trying to get my attention. I called out to her, reminding her to stay calm and that help was on the way. There was no response at first, then a sharp, frustrated shout. She was definitely angry now. I reminded myself not to engage too much. This wasn't about winning an argument or proving a point. It was about keeping control until the proper authorities arrived. I had to stay patient. Even though my frustration was growing, I thought about the lessons hidden in this chaos. How often do we let people walk all over us because we're afraid to speak up? How many times do we ignore red flags, hoping things will get better on their own? Sometimes you have to take a stand, even if it means locking a door and waiting for backup. As the sky darkened, I spotted the flashing lights of the sheriff's car down the street. Relief washed over me. The waiting was almost over, but I knew the real challenge was just beginning. I prepared myself for what was next, the conversation with the sheriff, explaining the situation, and dealing with Karen's reaction. I didn't expect it to be easy, but I was ready to face whatever came. In that moment, I realized how important it was to protect your space and your peace. Sometimes, people don't understand boundaries until they're enforced. And sometimes you have to be the one to enforce them, even if it's uncomfortable or difficult. I glanced back at the root cellar door, hearing Karen's muffled voice inside. The tension hung heavy in the air, but so did a strange sense of clarity. I knew I was doing the right thing. No matter what happened next, this was a line that couldn't be crossed. The sheriff's car pulled up slowly, its lights cutting to the growing dusk. I felt a strange mix of relief and nervousness. Relief because help was finally here, nervousness because I knew things were far from simple. I walked toward the vehicle, trying to stay calm and collected. The last thing I wanted was to make the situation worse with my own nerves. As the sheriff stepped out, I explained everything in clear, straightforward terms. I told him about Karen sneaking into my root cellar without permission, about how I found her there and locked the door until he arrived. I could see the sheriff's expression shift from curiosity to concern as I spoke. He listened carefully, asking a few questions to understand exactly what happened and why I felt the need to lock the door. Karen, meanwhile, was still inside, probably shouting or demanding to be let out. I could hear her muffled voice through the door as I spoke with the sheriff. She was not pleased, and her tone was sharp and accusatory. I knew she tried to spin the story her way, but I had to trust the facts and the law. The sheriff nodded slowly and walked over to the root cellar door. He tried the handle, which was locked tight. He asked me if I had a key, but of course, I didn't. This was my way of making sure Karen couldn't leave until he arrived. It was a tough call, but one I thought was necessary given the circumstances. He pulled out his radio and called for backup, just to be safe. Then, with his tools, he began to unlock the door. I watched closely, wondering what Karen's reaction would be when the door finally opened. Would she be angry, defiant, apologetic? I didn't know, but I braced myself for anything. When the door finally swung open, Karen stumbled out, still fuming. Her face was flushed, eyes blazing with frustration and embarrassment. She shot me a glare that could have frozen water, but I stood my ground. The sheriff stepped between us, calm and authoritative. He asked Karen to explain what she was doing in the root cellar. Her story was defensive and full of half-truths. She claimed she was just checking to see if I was storing anything dangerous, implying that she had some right to be concerned for the neighborhood's safety. It was clear she was trying to justify her actions, but the sheriff wasn't buying it. I explained that Karen had no permission, no warning, and that sneaking into someone's private property is illegal. The sheriff agreed, reminding us both about trespassing laws and the importance of respecting others' property. He made it clear that what Karen did was not acceptable, and that consequences could follow if this happened again. The tension between us was thick, but the sheriff's presence helped keep things from escalating further. He suggested that Karen leave the property immediately and that any future concerns be handled through proper channels. I could see the frustration on her face, but also a hint of resignation. After the sheriff finished speaking, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The situation was finally under control, and I could breathe again. I thanked the sheriff for his help and watched as he left, knowing that things might not be perfect, but at least they were settled for now. Karen gathered her things and left without another word. I stayed by the root cellar door for a while longer, making sure it was securely closed and locked. The whole experience left me shaken, but also strangely empowered. I had stood up for myself and my property, and the law was on my side. In the quiet that followed, I thought about how important it is to protect your boundaries. Sometimes, people don't respect the lines you set until you make them clear and firm. It's not about being mean or confrontational. It's about standing up for what's yours. I also thought about Karen, her anger, and her need to control. Maybe she was acting out of fear or insecurity. Maybe she just didn't understand the consequences of her actions. But no matter the reason, what mattered was that I had done what was necessary. The night grew darker, and the neighborhood settled back into its usual calm. I knew that things might get complicated with Karen in the future, but I also knew I was ready to handle whatever came next. That night, As I locked the door to root cellar one last time, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Sometimes you have to take bold steps to protect your peace. Sometimes locking a door is more than just securing a space. It's about taking control of your life. Even after Karen left, the whole situation lingered in my mind, twisting around like a storm that just wouldn't settle. It wasn't just about the root cellar or the locked door anymore. It became about what kind of person she was and why she felt so entitled to invade my space. I kept replaying every moment, every word, wondering what I could have done differently, or if I even should have done anything at all. Neighbors started to notice the tension. Whispers floated through the streets about the incident. Some people looked at me with sympathy, others with suspicion. When you live in a close community, word travels fast. Everyone wants to take sides, but I just wanted peace. That simple desire suddenly felt so complicated. I found myself thinking about boundaries, how easy it is for some people to ignore them and for others to struggle to enforce them. Boundaries aren't just physical lines around property. They're invisible rules about respect, trust, and privacy. Karen seemed to think those rules didn't apply to her. She acted like she had a right to be wherever she wanted, whenever she wanted, but she didn't. I also thought about the root cellar itself, my little refuge, the place where I stored food, memories, and hard work. It's funny how something as simple as a cellar door could hold so much meaning. Before all this, it was just a part of my home. Now, it symbolized so much more: control, safety, and the fight to keep what's mine. Then came the awkward conversations. People would ask about Karen or about the sheriff showing up. I had to decide how much to share without sounding like I was stirring up drama. It's hard to explain to someone why you locked a neighbor in a root cellar without sounding extreme. But the truth was, I felt cornered and I had to protect myself. The experience made me rethink how I dealt with conflict. For years, I tried to avoid it, hoping problems would fix themselves. But sometimes, avoiding conflict only lets it grow bigger. You have to face it head on, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means locking a door and waiting for the law to show up. In the days that followed, I noticed Karen's behavior changed. She kept her distance, maybe embarrassed, or maybe plotted her next move. Either way, the balance in the neighborhood shifted. People who had seen her as confident and demanding now saw a different side, the kind of person who pushes boundaries but gets stopped. I started paying more attention to how I set my own limits, not just with Karen, but with others too. Saying no, standing firm, and not letting people walk over me. It's a skill, one that takes practice. And sometimes it means making tough calls. That root cellar door, locked tight after the incident, reminded me daily of the power we have to protect ourselves. It's not about being aggressive or unkind. It's about respect, both giving it and demanding it. I found myself thinking about the sheriff's visit too. How calm and professional he was, stepping into a messy situation and helping to sort it out. It reminded me that sometimes you need outside help. Sometimes you can't handle everything alone. And that's okay. Slowly, the neighborhood began to feel normal again, but I knew things wouldn't be the same. The incident left a mark, a lesson about trust and the importance of standing your ground. It changed how I saw Karen and how I saw myself. I also started to realize that sometimes people like Karen aren't just being difficult on purpose. Maybe they feel powerless in other parts of their lives, and pushing into someone else's space is their way of gaining control. That didn't excuse her actions, but it helped me see the bigger picture. Looking back, I knew I had handled the situation as best as I could. I protected my property, my privacy, and my peace. I hadn't let anger take over, even when I wanted to. I'd stayed calm, firm, and fair. The root cellar door stayed locked for weeks after, a quiet reminder of that strange day. And each time I checked it, I felt a little stronger, a little more certain that I could handle whatever came next. Sometimes, the smallest things hold the biggest lessons. And sometimes, locking a door isn't just about keeping someone out. It's about keeping yourself safe. The days after that incident were a strange mix of relief and unease. On one hand, I was glad Karen had finally left and that the sheriff had handled things professionally. But on the other hand, the whole experience left me feeling exposed, like my personal space had been invaded in a way that couldn't easily be fixed. It wasn't just about the root cellar anymore. It was about trust and safety. Two things I realized are much harder to rebuild than a locked door. I started thinking about how we often take for granted the little things that keep us safe and comfortable. Our homes, our yards, even something as simple as a cellar door, are barriers that protect us from the outside world. When those barriers get broken, whether physically or emotionally, it shakes us in a way that lingers. Karen didn't just sneak into a cellar. She crossed a line I didn't expect someone to cross. And that left me questioning who I could really trust around here. Neighbors began to look at me differently. Some whispered behind their hands. Others avoided eye contact. It was like the incident created a ripple effect through the whole community. People started picking sides. Some saw me as a victim. Others wondered if I had overreacted. It's strange how a single event can change the way people see you, sometimes unfairly. I realized how fragile relationships can be when boundaries get crossed. It made me appreciate the importance of setting clear limits early on. When you let things slide or hope people will respect your space without saying anything, you leave yourself vulnerable. Karen took advantage of that. But I wasn't going to let it happen again. The root cellar door, once just a simple part of my home, now symbolized my resolve. Every time I locked it, I was reminding myself that my space matters, that my peace matters. I started paying more attention to other parts of my property, making sure everything was secure. It wasn't about paranoia. It was about reclaiming control. I also thought about the sheriff's role in all this. His calm, steady presence had been a grounding force in a chaotic moment. It showed me that sometimes you need outside help to set things right. You can't always do everything on your own, and that's okay. The law exists for situations like this, to protect people and their rights. Karen's actions forced me to confront a hard truth. Not everyone respects boundaries, and sometimes you have to be the one to enforce them. That can feel uncomfortable, even scary, but it's necessary. I found myself practicing saying no more often, not just to Karen, but in other areas of my life too. Standing firm isn't about being rude. It's about valuing yourself. The incident also made me rethink how I handle conflict. I used to avoid it, hoping problems would solve themselves or disappear. But ignoring issues only lets them grow bigger. Sometimes you have to face things head on, even when it's tough. Even when it means locking a door and waiting for the right help to arrive. Strangely, the whole experience gave me a new sense of strength. I realized that protecting yourself doesn't mean you're weak or aggressive. It means you respect yourself enough to stand up for what's yours. And that's a lesson I won't forget anytime soon. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, but the memory of that day stayed with me. It changed how I saw my home, my neighbors, and even myself. I became more aware of my surroundings and more confident in setting boundaries. Karen, on the other hand, seemed to withdraw. I didn't see her around as much, and when I did, she kept her distance. Whether she learned a lesson or just chose to avoid more trouble, I couldn't say. But the balance had shifted, and that felt like a small victory. Through all this, I realized something important. Boundaries aren't just about keeping people out. They're about creating space for yourself to live peacefully. They protect your time, your energy, and your sanity. And sometimes, enforcing those boundaries means making hard choices. That root cellar door remains locked, a quiet reminder of what happened and what I learned. Every time I glance at it, I'm reminded that I have the power to protect what matters most. Not just a physical space, but my peace of mind too. It's funny how a simple locked door can hold so much meaning. But that's exactly what happened. It became a symbol of strength, boundaries, and self-respect. And in the end, that's worth more than any argument or confrontation. The whole ordeal taught me that sometimes you have to do what's uncomfortable to protect yourself. And sometimes the smallest actions, like locking a door, can make the biggest difference. After everything that had happened, I found myself reflecting on how unpredictable people can be. Karen's sudden decision to sneak into my root cellar wasn't just shocking. It was a sharp reminder that sometimes the people around us don't respect our boundaries until we make them impossible to ignore. It made me wonder how many other situations I might have overlooked simply because I hoped things would stay peaceful. That moment when I locked the door and waited for the sheriff. Felt surreal. On the surface, it was just a door and a small space beneath the house. But underneath, it was a clash of respect, privacy, and control. Suddenly, my quiet life had turned into a lesson in standing up for myself in ways I never expected. The more I thought about Karen, the more I realized that this wasn't just about trespassing. It was about her sense of entitlement. She acted like she had the right to be wherever she wanted on my property, like my space wasn't really mine. It's hard to put into words, but it felt like a violation deeper than the physical space. It was as if she was trying to rewrite the rules of how neighbors should treat each other. I remembered all the small signs I might have missed before, her constant hovering around the property line, the way she questioned my decisions, the passive-aggressive comments that didn't seem like a big deal at the time. Looking back, it was like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. Karen had been testing boundaries long before she made that bold move into the root cellar. That realization was both frustrating and empowering. Frustrating because it meant I had let things slide too long. Empowering because it showed me what I needed to change going forward. Boundaries aren't just something you set once and forget. They're a continuous process, something you have to reinforce, especially with people who don't respect them naturally. I started thinking about how this applies to other parts of life, not just property or neighbors, but friendships, family, and even work. How often do we let people step over us because we don't want to cause conflict? How often do we hope things will just work themselves out? The Karen incident was a harsh reminder that sometimes you have to be proactive. That night, after the sheriff left and the door was locked again, I sat down and made a list of the ways I needed to protect myself better. It wasn't just about physical security, but about emotional and mental boundaries too. Saying no without guilt, standing firm when someone pushes too hard, and recognizing when it's time to call for help. The incident also made me appreciate how important communication is. If Karen had simply talked to me about whatever issues she thought were going on, maybe things would have been different. But instead, she chose secrecy and force. It's a tough lesson in how misunderstandings can escalate when people don't respect each other enough to be honest. The community's reaction added another layer to the story. Some neighbors sided with me, some with Karen, and others just watched from the sidelines. It was a reminder that people see things through their own lenses, often shaped by personal experiences and biases. That made me realize that I can't control what others think, only how I respond. I also thought about the role of the sheriff and the law. It was reassuring to know that there are systems in place to help when things get out of hand. But it also reminded me that sometimes the first line of defense is your own willingness to stand up and take action. In the days that followed, I paid close attention to how I interacted with others. I was more mindful about setting limits early on, not letting frustration simmer beneath the surface. It was a kind of self-care I hadn't prioritized before. The root cellar, once just a storage space, had become a symbol of more than security. It represented my right to peace, respect, and safety. Every time I passed by it, I felt a quiet sense of strength. It reminded me that protecting what's yours isn't about confrontation. It's about self-respect. Karen's visit, as unwelcome as it was, pushed me to grow in ways I hadn't anticipated. It forced me to examine how I handle conflict, how I set boundaries, and how I protect my space. It was uncomfortable, yes, but necessary. Looking ahead, I knew things wouldn't be perfect. There might still be tension, awkward encounters, or even more challenges. But I felt ready to face whatever came next with confidence and calm. It's strange how a simple act, locking a door, can change your perspective on so many things. Sometimes it's the small decisions that reveal the biggest truths about who we are and what we stand for. And in the end, I realized that protecting your space isn't just about walls or locks. It's about knowing your worth, trusting your instincts, and standing firm, even when it's hard, because that's where real strength lives. After all the chaos settled, there was a strange quiet that filled the space where tension used to hang. It wasn't the kind of quiet that felt safe or peaceful, though. It was the kind that made you stay alert, watching for what might come next, wondering if things would ever truly be the same again. That moment when Karen snuck into my root cellar had cracked something open, not just in my property, but in the way I saw everything around me. The root cellar had always been just part of the house, a practical space for storage. But now it felt almost symbolic, a reminder of boundaries crossed and lessons learned. Every time I glanced at that locked door, I remembered the sharp edge of shock when I realized Karen was inside. It was a feeling I hadn't expected but couldn't shake. The idea that someone I knew, a neighbor, would invade my private space without a second thought was unsettling. I started thinking about trust and how fragile it can be. Trust isn't something given lightly. It's earned through respect and understanding. Karen's actions felt like betrayal on multiple levels. It wasn't just that she trespassed, it was the way she did it, sneaking in without a word, like she thought it was her right. It left me wondering what else people might be hiding, what other lines might be crossed without me realizing. At the same time, I couldn't help but feel a strange kind of empathy. People act out for all sorts of reasons: fear, jealousy, insecurity. Maybe Karen felt threatened or out of control in her own life and tried to assert power by crossing into mine. It doesn't excuse what she did, but it added complexity to the situation. It made me realize that beneath the anger and frustration, there was a human story I didn't fully understand. The sheriff's visit stuck with me too. That calm authority walking through my yard, taking control of the situation, brought a sense of order to the chaos. It reminded me that there are systems in place to protect us, but also that sometimes we have to be the ones to call on that help. I thought about how many people might ignore their instincts or hesitate to speak up, letting problems grow until they're out of control. After the sheriff left, I felt a shift in how I viewed my role in the neighborhood. I realized I wasn't just a passive resident. I had a responsibility to myself and to others to keep things safe and respectful. It wasn't about confrontation or escalation. It was about setting clear lines and standing firm when necessary. The experience also changed how I handle my own emotions. I used to push down frustration and anger, trying to keep the peace. But after Karen, I learned that ignoring those feelings only made things worse. It's important to acknowledge when you're upset, to face those emotions head on instead of letting them fester. That's how you heal and move forward. I found myself more aware of the little things too. The way people look at you, the tone of a conversation, subtle changes in behavior. It's easy to overlook these signs until something major happens. Karen's sneak into the cellar was a wake-up call to pay attention, to trust my instincts, and to act before problems spiral. Neighbors started to behave differently after that day. Some avoided me, uncomfortable with the tension. Others showed quiet support, understanding that boundaries have been tested and stood up to. It was a reminder that community isn't just about proximity. It's about mutual respect and communication. I also thought about how important it is to have a support system. Whether it's law enforcement, friends, or family, having people you can rely on makes a huge difference. That sheriff's presence was reassuring. But so was knowing I had people around who understood the situation and stood by me. Karen's retreat into silence was telling. Whether she was embarrassed, angry, or rethinking her actions, she disappeared from the immediate neighborhood drama. But the impact of what she did stayed with all of us. It served as a cautionary tale about respecting boundaries and the consequences of ignoring them. That locked root cellar door became a symbol in my mind, a symbol of strength and self-respect. Not just a physical barrier, but a boundary I was determined to defend. It reminded me that sometimes the smallest actions carry the biggest weight. The incident changed my perspective on what it means to protect yourself. It's not about aggression or confrontation. It's about knowing your worth and standing firm in your space. It's about having the courage to face uncomfortable situations and the wisdom to seek help when needed. I thought about how often we let things slide to keep the peace, but sometimes that peace is just silence before a storm. Karen taught me that standing up, setting limits, and demanding respect isn't just necessary, it's empowering. Every day, I pass by that root cellar and remember the day everything changed. It's a reminder that boundaries matter, that respect is earned and must be maintained, and that sometimes protecting what's yours means taking bold steps you never thought you would. It's strange how one moment can shift your whole outlook. But in that moment, locked in that root cellar, everything became clear. Protecting yourself and your space isn't just about walls and locks. It's about self-respect, courage, and standing your ground no matter what. Since that day when Karen snuck into my root cellar, I've come to see things differently about neighbors, about trust, and about the invisible lines that keep us safe. It's crazy how one unexpected moment can make you question everything you thought you knew. I mean, before this, I never really thought much about the root cellar. It was just part of the house, a place to store food and supplies. But after that day, it became a symbol of something much bigger. I started paying attention to the little things around me, the way people moved through the neighborhood, how they respected or didn't respect other people's space. It's easy to assume everyone plays by the same rules, but Karen proved that's not always true. Some people will push and push until they find a crack in your boundaries. And if you don't stand firm, they'll keep pushing. It made me think about how often we let things slide just to keep the peace. Maybe it's easier to avoid confrontation, to say nothing, to hope the problem goes away. But sometimes that only invites more problems. Karen's actions were a wake-up call. They showed me that standing up for yourself isn't just about yelling or fighting. It's about being clear, calm, and unshakable. The locked door of the root cellar became a kind of armor. Every time I walked past it, I felt a sense of control return. It reminded me that I had taken back my space, that I wasn't going to let anyone violate again. That simple lock wasn't just metal and wood. It was my boundary made physical. I also began to understand that boundaries aren't just about property lines or physical spaces. They're about respect. Respect for yourself and for others. Karen didn't show me respect when she snuck in, but I learned that respect isn't something you ask for politely and hope for the best. Sometimes you have to demand it through your actions. The whole experience made me question my own responses too. How often do I avoid conflict because it feels uncomfortable? How often do I let people cross lines because I don't want to be seen as difficult? Karen forced me to rethink that approach. I realized that being firm and clear doesn't make you difficult. It makes you strong. Neighbors started to notice a change in me. I wasn't as passive or quiet. I stood up more, not just about Karen, but in other situations where I felt my space or my feelings were being ignored. It was like something inside me had shifted. I wasn't willing to be pushed around anymore. I also saw how important it was to communicate boundaries clearly. Sometimes we think people should just know what's okay and what isn't, but that's rarely the case. Karen might have been testing me because I never told her no outright. After that day, I made it a point to be clear and direct, so there was no confusion. The sheriff's involvement was a reminder that there are limits to what we can handle on our own. Sometimes you need help to enforce boundaries, especially when someone refuses to respect them. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of wisdom to reach out when things get beyond your control. Karen's disappearance after the incident was telling. Whether she realized she'd gone too far or just wanted to avoid further trouble, she backed off. That alone was proof that standing firm works. It sends a message that you won't be an easy target. As time passed, the neighborhood slowly went back to normal, but I knew things had changed. The way I viewed my home, my neighbors, and myself was different now. I had learned that protecting your space isn't a one-time act. It's an ongoing process. I started thinking about how many people might be going through similar struggles, feeling invaded, disrespected, or powerless in their own homes or communities. It's a quiet battle that many fight alone. But sharing this story, even without faces or names, feels important. It's a reminder that standing up for yourself matters. That locked root cellar door, once just a simple fixture, now holds a story. It's a story of unexpected courage, of boundaries set and respected, and of a person learning to protect what's theirs. Every time I think about it, I'm reminded that strength often comes in small, quiet moments. It also makes me hopeful that others can learn from what happened, that they'll find their own ways to stand firm when boundaries are tested. Because everyone deserves to feel safe in their own space, to have their privacy respected, and to live without fear of intrusion. Looking back, the whole situation with Karen was more than just an inconvenience. It was a lesson in self-respect, in courage, and in the power of boundaries. And even though it was uncomfortable and unexpected, it made me stronger. Now, when I walk by that locked door, I don't just see wood and metal, I see resilience. I see a boundary that was crossed and then firmly reestablished. I see a reminder that sometimes the toughest moments teach us the most important lessons. And maybe that's what the story is really about: how we handle those moments when our peace is threatened, how we find strength in vulnerability, and how we learn that protecting ourselves isn't just okay, it's necessary.